You should keep the subtle little chime hour plug. Yeah.
I'm gonna leave it. I'm leaving
Just
it.
subliminal messaging.
It is. It's just my boyfriend made that for me. Okay, so it's a wood panel,
Oh.
and
Oh.
he got it made at. He works at Walgreens, or for now works at Walgreens, and he does the photo area. They make wood panels of like whatever you want. So he got Nicole's permission, and he printed a copy of my cover. I use it for book events. I actually brought it to several book fairs now, and I just set it on the table, and people are like, "Ooh, look at that! That's a nice cover." They don't buy it, but they sure like the cover. God.
Well, it's got to start there. I mean, if the cover is not getting any positive attention, then
You're already in a bad place. The cover is getting nothing.
That's a much deeper hole to dig yourself out of.
Yeah, no, I've learned that much. It's why I actually don't make my own covers. I'm just not a good graphic artist. I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
I can fake it, but I'm not a smart enough graphic artist to pretend like I know how to make a cover. And that's why I hand things over to my cover artist.
Yeah.
She knows way better than I do. She has a degree in that. I don't. So
nice.
Yeah, she actually has a degree in graphic design. My degree is in literary studies. So we work with what we have. I'm good at the book part. She's good at the art part. Okay, so this is the first of the Academia Anthology, The Masks We Wore interviews. My name is Caitlin Jones. I am an indie author and the founder of Academia Discussions and Blogs. With me today is, if you want to say your name for yourself.
David Gowey.
David. I've known David a long time, so we are kind of we're at the end of a conversation, actually, and kind of in the middle. But we have been working together, obviously, for a while with Academia. I know you've been with us since the beginning of the project, not just the second beginning. So before we really get rolling on the conversations about your part in Academia and your part in the anthology, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your writing?
Okay, well, so right now I'm a 5th year PhD student in sociocultural anthropology at ASU. 5th is kind of a frightening number because it doesn't feel like it's been that long, but man, I guess I've been with Academia longer than that, even a couple years more, so that's a nice little time capsule, I guess. So I have done sci-fi before, mostly. I'm trying to focus on fantasy right now. All sort of the same interconnected setting, different stories at different places and times in this secondary world sort of place that not so vaguely resembles our own. I don't know, what else we got?
One question, actually, do you prefer the sci-fi or do you prefer working with fantasy now?
I think I prefer the fantasy because I don't even know if I really want to call it fantasy, actually, because I'm when we talk about the story that I put in the anthology, I tend to be very ambiguous about any magical elements that show up. And like, there's not going to be any dragons or like grand shows of overtly magical magic. What I try and do is more like psychological exploration of the characters' worldviews. So I think the fantasy is more appealing because through that sort of idea, it lets me get into, how the characters perceive their own setting and how they interact with others through the idea that certain things about their world they believe to be true or know to be true as much as they can know anything. And I want to look at how this affects the way that they live their lives. For sci-fi, there's the same, I think, idea could apply, but I'm just not as into it right now, I guess. It's a really long answer.
No, I absolutely understand this. Writing especially, I mean, how long have you been writing?
That's about, it's probably just about as long as I've been reading. Like if you ask my mom or somebody and say, oh yeah, you were writing stuff since you were whatever, and I don't know that I really thought of it that way, you know, but in retrospect, it was something that I've been doing for as long as I can remember, whether it was like writing down little stories on printer paper or, you know, making far too elaborate stories with Legos or something, you know.
The playtime structure of having, like, I used to build political systems and magic systems with my Barbies and my stuffed animals. Like, they had a hierarchy, and it was very important that it was a very complex hierarchy, and they had ongoing stories. But I absolutely understand this. I do. And I remember stealing my grandfather's old, you remember the ringed printer paper, the kind you had the little, you had those the ripped off the sides.
Oh yeah, with the perforations on the side.
Yeah, the old printer paper. I used to steal that. I used to use that specifically to make picture books. So I think there's something very universal in that. Most writers I know have that backdrop. They don't really remember when they started. They were, you know, it always was. And I think to that end, what the long way to the short answer here is that we change over time and we grow into other genres and stories. We don't necessarily stay in the ones we end up, you know, even in short amounts of time, jumping from genre to genre. Actually, I'm trying to get into sci-fi now and I'm unsuccessful. We'll see how it goes. To that end, because obviously you've got a lot of history, this is what brought you to academia in the first place. So just off the bat, tell me about your experience with academia in its full lifespan.
Oh, the full lifespan. Well,
if you want to talk about part 1 and part 2, you can, but I'm going to give you lead because you've been with us long.
Yeah. Well, I remember finding Inkit in the first place because I was still in the very beginning stages of trying to turn all the notes and little snippets that I had for my first book, Kashar's Quarter, into an actual book. And I had the idea of making it a serial story because I was impatient and I wanted to get it out there before, you know, having to wait for an entire book. I wanted to see what people thought of it and, you know, if it was going to be something that anyone found interesting other than myself. So Inkit was a site that came up when I was looking for places that I could post, you know, one chapter at a time and try and generate some interest or see if there was interest to be generated. And academia, out of all the different forums on the website, was the more appealing because it was not given to like the drop-in self-promo posts that all the other forums were all about. I mean, it's kind of endemic to the way writers interact with each other, unfortunately. There's a lot of self-promo and not a lot of engagement, because I know we're all in this to sell books.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at the end of the day, we're trying to sell books, or at least get eyeballs on books. But we can't just do that all the time. You have to have discussions. So I really like that about academia, just moving outside of trying to push books on people, to talk about the things that make the books tick. You know, plot structure and comparative literature, you know, our thoughts about how we go about doing this thing.
Yeah, and coming from my perspective, it was building academia was tricky. In some ways it was dropped on me. It wasn't really a project I had ever intended to adopt. So I basically got my job over there. And 2 weeks later, this project was handed to me, and they're like, make this, make something. So a lot of what you saw happening in academia was off the cuff, and in large part due to my partner, Dr. Grasso, who was really much better at working off the cuff than I was. I had a baseline for what academia was supposed to be. I wanted to respond, I know that was at the core, to the problems of people not stopping. You would enter a forum, and not just that forum, but any forum, and I still see it on the internet, of people dropping off into Facebook groups and to writing groups and just dropping their story and vanishing. And the conversation we have with writing and about ourselves in writing, it has to extend further beyond buy my book. I know I want people to buy my book. It's really hard to sell the book, but at the end of the day, if you can't engage beyond sell the book and engage as a character in and of yourself in some ways and make yourself present, you never sell the book to begin with. That's part of it, at least. The other part was just I saw the beginnings of that kind of conversation on that forum. Once upon a time, that forum was very capable of conversation and intelligent conversation. I know it doesn't seem like it. I know it devolved, but it did happen. And I wanted to give a space for people to engage in that in a friendly way, in a way that was concrete. It also encouraged the idea of making a blog, because the blog at the end wrapped things up and allowed us to solidify ideas that we had built from the discussion. It was actually one of my favorite parts when I finally got to write the blogs. That was so much fun. So yeah, it was really important to have you, especially because you always contributed so well. Especially, I know on.
Well, thank you.
You did. I know. It's something I miss, actually, is being able to discuss back and forth on ideas like that. But I know particularly more. I don't remember you as much on part 1 academia, but I know you were there. Of course, I was always busy. Part 2 academia, I was more involved in, and you've always been so good at contributing in there. And you know, it means a lot to have people who can add to the discussion as well as just read along. You know.
Yeah.
So, which brings us to our anthology and the anthology wrap up. So, you were one of our first to submit for the anthology's creation. I know you already elaborated on it just a little bit. You can summarize if you want. Tell me a little bit about your story and why you submitted it to Academia's anthology.
So, the story I submitted is The Ashen Crown, and it's essentially about a temple ritual that's supposed to renew the world, performed by the emperor when they're about to be crowned, which is, what that crowning entails is included in the story. So I won't spoil that. You gotta have a hook, But the idea came out of some things I was reading for school, particularly reading Eliade about this idea of like a hierocentric religious and political structure. Hierocentric meaning it's like centered on power, specifically like divine power, and looking at things like rituals and specifically temples as a sort of scale model of the cosmos, where the things humans do on Earth is either in imitation of or in anticipation of things that divine beings are doing in heaven on humanity's behalf.
I know that. It's really cool.
So like, it's cool, like it's a little reductive, but that it's the kind of thing that in academia you can explore this and problematize it in different ways. But I wanted to take it and use it as a little story seed and say, okay, well, what would this look like for somebody who was having to perform this ritual before he was really ready? Can you be ready to do this kind of thing? Can you really feel inside yourself that you really are worthy or prepared to take upon yourself what you fully believe, or maybe don't fully believe, as the fate of the universe? You have to go inside this building where they don't really tell you what goes on in there, but you've got to do it and you've got to survive it, because if you don't, the religious texts say that if you don't, then the world will just sort of melt away as candle wax, because when the gods come in their wrath, it's just not good for anybody.
That's absolutely fascinating. That is actually, like, I really loved the story when I read it. And I read it last year, so you'll forgive me, it's been a little bit of a minute, but your depth on it is really fascinating. I knew it had some weight beneath it, I could tell from my reading, but wow, that is absolutely fantastic to hear about. They kind of answered the question that I had lined up about its real world issues, because you did mention the inspiration. Did you aim to subvert any tropes in this story in particular, or just writing as is?
I don't know if I really was trying to subvert any tropes with it, just more like play them as straight as I could. Mm-hmm. Like take them very seriously in terms of, if this is all actually what's going to happen, if you don't carry out the ritual and the world ends as a result, then what's that going to do to drive somebody to take on this responsibility? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It's less of a subversion than more of a response to the higher end of the question that you gave. So that's why I was like, trope is kind of a strange way of phrasing this. Mm-hmm. And I know you said it, but do you feel this reflects any specific real world issues, or just rooted specifically in your research?
I mean, I can see parallels with like real world religious experiences. So like another sort of religious studies idea that comes out is this idea of a liminal state, where you're like, Joseph Campbell talks about these as well, where you're between two defined points in your life, you know, like between childhood and adulthood, for example, or between, um, I guess like college and grad school would be a liminal state as well, where you're like, you're between your required formal education and getting a career. So
Mm-hmm.
you're using this liminal state to prepare. And the rules are a little different in these liminal states. More things are permitted there than would be permitted elsewhere. But once you're done with that, you're expected to go back to like the regular social norms. Generally.
Yeah, which is generally.
Yeah. Doesn't always happen that way, but that's why these things are a theory.
Right. And for those of us, some of us, it feels like eternal studentry sometimes when you're rolling from, you know, watching bachelor's to grad right now. That's what I'm looking at. And it's like, you know, people are going to start asking me about jobs and what I want to do for myself. And it's like, well, I'm going to school to get a job.
So you can go back to school.
Get a job. Go back to school, right? And you keep doing that until you have the big one. And then it's like, okay. But, you know, it's not, liminal spaces are also very, I love your mention of Joseph Campbell. I've read, I have several of his books, and his myth book in particular is absolutely like special to me. But liminal spaces are especially complicated. The theme, quote unquote, in the anthology for Masks was sort of about in some ways for me, the liminal spaces between who we are outside and who we are inside. When I give a very loose definition of theme there, but
yeah,
because I never aimed really for a theme. But when we look at ourselves on a liminal space, and I think liminal spaces in general teach us about who we are on the outside just as well as they teach us about who we are on the inside. They change those things about us. And it's interesting to think about because it's not something I aimed for as a theme, but all of the stories kind of hit on that in some sense, which I will talk more with the other authors about their stories and what they accomplished with that. But it's nice to know that that theme translated forward for everyone. Which kind of leads to the question that I've got my question right here. How does your character plot or story in any way, shape, or form you want to answer this embody the idea of a mask, quote unquote? But again, it's a kind of a liminal thought too.
Okay. Well, again, without giving the whole plot away, still have to get people to want to read it.
Right.
So in this story, Josh Tan, the main character, is he's 13 years old, and I don't know that he's really being forced, but he's being compelled in various ways, internally or externally, to perform this ritual. And if he doesn't do it, then he's not really considered a true emperor. And his position is a lot more fragile than if he doesn't do it. And so that idea also influenced how I would want to write his internal thoughts about the doubts that he has, like, is this really what's going to happen if I do it, if I don't do it? Will I survive this? Because other emperors, he's a bit of a nerd, so he'll like go and read the archives and see like, oh, this guy didn't make it out of here. That's interesting. Now I've got to go do it. How did he survive? How did this guy not survive? And so when he goes into the ritual, I guess this isn't really a spoiler either. He's subjected to these sort of like fairy tale tests where certain things that are not permitted outside the ritual context are framed in such a way that they're permitted now. And so he has to ask himself, is this really what they're telling me? Can I really do these things or not? Is this a test of my character? And if it is a test of his character, then, is it enough to just go through the motions and present himself as a righteous ruler when really the intent of the ceremony is supposed to produce a certain kind of ruler who doesn't need to be governed by these external laws and commandments and punishments. They're righteous of their own free will. So that I think is the teal deer version of the mask idea. It's like, can he get through it by just faking it? Can he get through it by coasting, or does he really have to internalize what those tests are trying to teach him and let that guide his conduct?
Which really, that brings together, because I give that loose definition idea again, gives more of a liminal space idea like you talked about. And the idea of masks, not in the metaphor, in more of a metaphorical sense, and then the traditional how we didn't want to interpret this, right? So yeah, this absolutely, and like I said, no spoilers, because obviously we're looking to release this, and it will be out on Amazon at some point. So some point soon, actually, as far as I know. So we should be able to share it soon and see how people feel about it. Getting back to you as an author, but also as a person, because those are two different things in some ways, right? The author and persona and the person we are when the author persona comes off are often their versions of who this is, but they're not really us sometimes. So a lot of the questions about authors here kind of tie into that. What is more important to you, either as author or as David, the proverbial mask or what is underneath it?
That is one of those questions. I mean, I see it as sort of a straight line from the irritation that I felt with other writing community type forums, where the prevalence of advertising and, for advertising's sake, just removes the ability to really have meaningful engagement. And so, the positive examples that I would look at of authors who are, in some ways are still putting on a sort of character, but it's one that is not just for advertising. I admit, I bought books from Sam Sykes and Mike Cole because of the Twitter banter. I don't know if you've seen those threads.
I have seen them screenshotted, yes. I know what you're talking about. And I too have bought authors' books solely on the motivation of how they interact on the internet. I've actually done that. So, there's something to be said for the author persona. I think it is a thing, and it has a role to play in authors. So go on.
Yeah. I mean, so you can't really know what somebody's internal world is like, even if you meet them in person and are friends and all those things. There's still going to be a separation there. But the persona that we do create for ourselves as either authors or public-facing academics needs to be engaging in some way that relates to how we really are, I think. Otherwise, people are going to spot that. And sometimes the public-facing persona can be abrasive if it really pulls from the things that we're actually about in person, or like pulls from our internal world too much. Maybe not all of that stuff needs to be maybe said or heard by others, you know.
I think authors struggle with that sometimes too, especially if they have an agent or a publicist or a soundboard, any soundboard.
Yeah.
And I'll give credit. I know a lot of indie authors who cultivate a great cult of personality without needing a whole lot of feedback, but they usually have a circle that they can go back to and go, hey, should I post that? And the feedback circle goes, no, probably not, you know.
Yeah.
But and not that everyone needs one, but most authors, let me preface that because I know better, have issues with the public, and usually in some way, shape, or form aren't fond of the public. They are, you know, most of us, I like the public generally, but, you know, most of us, even me, don't want to deal with the public all the time. And I think that's where the author persona comes in. You need it. Otherwise, if I tell you all the time about every trouble I'm having with one paragraph, it's not very exciting. In fact, your opinion on this is warranted, but it's because it's tangentially related. So you don't have Scrivener, right? Or do you?
I don't actually.
Okay. So some writing tools like Scrivener and Hemingway and a couple of other like third-party writing tools that aren't Word, they will stream. They connect to Discord, and they stream live. And so I figured this out very recently. I finally got. I'm an old fogey. I got Discord finally, but I got Discord and I connected it, and it streamed my writing, and I'm like, who would want to watch that? That's so boring. Who could watch me erase paragraphs for an hour? But some people use it. They use it for NaNoWriMo. Evidently, they'll do write-ins and they'll stream their work. I had to look it up. I'd never seen that. I didn't know how to feel about it, so I was interested to see how other authors felt about it too.
Yeah, I mean, that I'm conflicted because knowing myself and the way I motivate myself to do things, another part of the reason why I like posting chapter drafts is because I can convince myself that somewhere somebody is waiting for the next one. And so I better write the next one, or else they're gonna, you know, be disappointed or something. I don't know if they'll be disappointed. Maybe they don't exist. But these external motivations help me. So I don't know, maybe there's somebody out there who really wants to watch my blinking cursor. So I'm like, oh gosh, how do I write this, you know?
It's long-term sports, that's what it is.
Yeah, hook up a microphone, it'll hear me like trying to speak in character as I formulate dialogue. No, I hope no one wants to watch that, but maybe they do. I don't know.
I don't know. I had mixed feelings on it, and it made me wonder too, because it kind of ties into this. Is the writing space truly a time to put on the writing persona? Because at least for me, the writing space, the place you go where you write and no one else is not a place where the persona lies. The persona is a completely different thing, right? You know, I don't know if that's true for everyone else, and I'd feel weird making my art performative, because the performative part is after it's done, or at least drafted, and that's where it's performative. But maybe it's, you reminded me of it, and it was interesting to me because some writers do it too on Twitter and on Tumblr. They'll post just raw first drafts of what they've just written and share it. And for me, I was like, I don't know if I'd be comfortable sharing that much of myself. It's too much. So yeah, it's going back to that, the writing space and the persona is a complicated thing too. Because I don't know how you feel. Like I said, the persona is not, the author and the writer are almost two different people sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's tricky. There was one last question. Let me find it. I forgot what I was looking at. Well, it kind of relates to this. What is the mask you wear, in any sense of that word? And do you think people would be surprised to see what they see when you take it off? And you could answer that question however you were comfortably able to.
Well, I think that since a lot of my engagement as a writer person tends to happen on Twitter, it's like, that is a space that tends to incentivize hot takes, and you got to be reacting to the things that other people are reacting to on this website, so that you can get people to see that you have an opinion too, and it might even be a good one, but either way they're going to be talking about you. Which is quite like academia, in fact. Not the project, but the institution.
Yes, I know the truth.
If there's, as long as they're citing you, it still counts towards your tenure review, whether they're angry or not. And so, I mean, the mask in that sense would probably lean towards, like, maybe not combative necessarily, but like, I've got opinions on things. This is what they are. Which could be false in some sense, because I share the opinions that I have, but I don't have there are a lot of things that I don't need to have an opinion on. If it relates to writing rules, I don't really have an opinion on a lot of them. Like, destroy all adverbs? Well, no, not necessarily. They can be fine sometimes. Info dumps are bad. Well, maybe they're bad, but if you write them well, they're engaging, if you have a good narrative voice, then sure. Hitchhiker's Guide is like almost all exposition, but the exposition's hilarious, so we just go for it. A narrative voice telling us, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy tells us that the ravenous bug bladder beast of Trawl does this, So, like, those kinds of things are, from what I've seen, very important to how other people engage with the role of being a writer or the act of writing. And so, like, yeah, I'll participate in that when it's fun, when it looks like it's going to be productive and entertaining, let's be honest.
Yeah. And
but it's a selection, it's, I don't really just sit here angry all the time. I promise.
I think too, some of what we do when we talk about writing rules is very performative as well. Nobody I know actually writes like that. Like, if you start listing off all of the writing rules that the internet provides, it's not even Hemingway-esque writing. It's bare bones nothing writing. And I don't know anybody who writes like that. I worry too sometimes, because I know seasoned writers participate in it because they're trying to instill something and kind of signal to in-group behavior. But younger writers, I worry, take that so personally, and I've watched them take that so personally that they just whitewash their writing and clean it of any flavor or character. And let's be honest, good books need some flavor. They can't just be like vanilla.
Mm-hmm.
They can, but it's not gonna get too much. But yeah, no, I agree with you completely. And I think in writing communities, it's tricky. It's a tricky space. Having run one, it's tricky.
Yeah.
I see people who came in with fully fledged ideas on where they were supposed to exist in a writing community before they had even established where they were. And just bolstering temperament, that was their thing. They'd come off aggressive. I knew people who that was just what they did, and it must have worked for them somewhere. On the other hand, I knew people who entered writing communities, especially the one I ran, who were very timid and would use that timidness to kind of structure themselves in such a way that they were less threatening to a community. So when they did open up and talk, they were more friendly. It was always interesting to me to observe that from a bird's eye view, because I know what I do now in group settings, and I'm very aware of it because I got to watch everybody else do it. And it's still, and being a community manager, you get to learn that and see everybody else and realize that every author does the exact same thing. They just choose a different response to it, I think that's all of our questions. Yes, it is.
All right.
So, tell us the name of your story before I wrap up real quick.
The Ashen Crown.
Ashen Crown, and that's going to be available on Academia's new anthology, first and last, technically, that will hopefully during the summer. There will be other featured authors in that anthology, including Hannah Ross, Patrick Tuttle, and Shannon Royer. I will also be doing a foreword and including some of our blog pieces that we did over the years, at least mine, that were really prominent and I'm really pleased with. I was going to write a short story, but that didn't happen, so I'm putting in things I already wrote.
Well, so did we. At least I did.
Yeah, I think that was pretty common.
Yeah.
I think that was actually pretty universal, so don't confess it. So I think that's everything. I really thank you for giving me the time to talk with you about this. This has been very enlightening and refreshing, and it's very intelligent to have this conversation. Considering what I spent and considering how much I made back, that was nice. But it can get expensive to make hardcovers, so I haven't fooled with it yet. But if I would put the inlay with like all of her art. So pretty.
That's the dream.
That's the dream.
The special edition.
With all my inlay with all the inlay art my fans made. That's what you want. That's what all of us want.
Just a nice big fold out map that's like bold color. That's what, I don't know. What else could you want, really?
You want a bookmark that's like sewn into the top and it matches the cover.
Okay, there is more that you can want. I want that now too, actually. Now that you mentioned it, give me a bookmark.
You want a pretty bookmark.
I
did make bookmarks. I did, and those are really nice, but I thought about it. I have an edition of something that has like one of those sewed in little bookmarks. It's like, if I could get a purple bookmark, I could sew it in on the top. Oh, it would be. I'm trying to remember if I did any. Oh, I did do some academic versions of this with University of Pennsylvania, I want to say. I participated in some sort of survey right before all of this COVID nonsense happened and got a $20 gift card for my trouble.
That's fun.
Yeah, Yeah, it was. It was neat. I've never done anything like that. One of my professors sent me it, and he was like, "Here, just apply. You might get something." I don't think he expected they'd actually interview me. And then they pulled my name. They're like, "What have you done? You have the weirdest history in writing I've ever." Maybe you've been to Berlin.
What are you supposed to say to that? Thanks.
Oh.
$20, please.
My $20 Amazon gift card, please, and go and buy some more books. Yeah, that's what I spent money on was books, because that's all I ever buy. You can't see it, but there's a bookshelf above, and it's twofold. And then there's a bookshelf up there.
I see a little bit of it.
And that's a bookshelf. And that's not a bookshelf, but I made it one. And then there's a bookshelf in my closet. So it's getting out of hand. I have to decide which ones I'm bringing with me when I move.